Hey, what's going on guys? Conmaan here. Today I wanted to talk about a game that I picked up on Steam a while ago and have recently gotten back into playing, For the King. As of making this video, I've sunk about 30 hours into it and have played entirely through the main campaign and got through close to what is a third of the Frost Adventure DLC. That being said, let's get right into my quick overview and first impressions. For the King is a roguelike hardcore, turn-based combat, hex-based movement RPG with some FTL elements mixed in, and wow, that was kind of a mouthful. You can tell there's a lot going on from a gameplay standpoint. It's set in a fantasy world where the king is dead and the kingdom is in chaos. You play as up to 3 of the 11 playable character classes currently available in the game. These characters will be a part of your party that you create at the start of each playthrough, and each character has a few different customization options as well as their own unique starting equipment, special abilities, and starting stats. If you start off in the For the King campaign, you are immediately greeted with the overworld map, which is randomly generated each time that you play, and it consists of a number of different biomes and terrain features. The Queen of Fa gives you some quests to kick things off, and you're ready to start exploring. The first town that you spawn in, or town, will have a market, a service center, and a quest board. This is true for most of the inland towns in the game. As you venture out to explore the world, you can participate in random encounters which have the potential for unique rewards. These encounters are very similar to FTL-style games in the sense that you're typically faced with one of several decisions depending on the nature of the encounter. The cool thing about For the King is that there is usually a very clear understanding of what your chances to succeed or fail are, and sometimes it also displays what the nature of the reward for success or punishment for failure will be. In addition to encounters, you can also run into enemies on the overworld map, which will initiate a turn-based fight. When initiating a fight, it's important that you're aware of which allies and enemies will enter into the battle. This is typically based off of proximity to the enemy that is encountered, but can sometimes be affected by certain abilities and attributes, such as whether or not the enemy is in a camp, or if a character you control has the support range ability, which allows them to enter into the combat even if they're an additional tile away. You also have the options to ambush an enemy, which will not draw in enemies from other tiles. You can sneak past an enemy, which gives you the chance to move past them at the cost of the risk of entering into the combat at an initial speed disadvantage. And then you can also just simply retreat, in which case you would fall back 1 tile in the direction that you came from at the cost of the movement that it took to do so. When in a fight, players can perform a single primary action per turn. These primary actions consist of one of the following: a basic attack move, any special attack moves that are attached to the weapon that the character currently has equipped, any special abilities linked to items, armor, or the character itself because of class attributes, or you can attempt to flee a combat. All these primary actions are shown in the center of the screen and have total damage and success rate per roll displayed, as well as targets affected. You can use focus to get a guaranteed roll when performing an action and increase the success rate of all subsequent rolls within the same action. Note that using a single focus point, unless the action that you are performing only has to make a single roll, will not guarantee success. And in some cases, an ability may be attached to having to roll a perfect. Focus can be used to increase movement on the overworld screen as well as in encounters to increase the odds of success. It can be difficult to regenerate, so in general, focus should be used as sparingly as possible. In addition to these primary actions, you also have the ability to use things in your player's usable inventory, which is displayed to the right of the health total at the bottom of the screen. Things like herbs, potions, and other single-use items are all displayed here. The combat ends when you or the enemy has run out of characters with remaining health, or if all characters on either side of the battle have successfully fled a combat. After a successful combat, you will typically gain Exp, Gold, and usually an item or two depending on the enemies that you fought. Exp allows you to level up and increase your base stats and health, and Gold can be used to purchase new equipment at towns and shops. In addition to all these features, there are also dungeons, which consist of back-to-back combats and encounters, chaos, which is a scaling difficulty that the player has to manage over time, sanctums, which gives semi-permanent buffs and an extra life, weather, which can deal damage and impede movement, new campaigns, a post-game unlock store, status effects, boss battles, and much, much more. As for my experience, I have to say that the initial jump into the game can be pretty overwhelming, and it definitely seems like there's a lot working against you. I went over a lot of different concepts in this video, many of which may seem pretty similar to what you as a player are familiar with in other games. You have to think about things in the context of For the King. So for example, the hex grid tile-based movement system. It's there in Civ and a few other strategy-style games as well, but it plays out very differently in this case. Take all these things together and you have something that's completely transformative, existing on its own without any real method of comparison, because in so many other ways, it's just so different, and it's just really hard to draw some parallels between For the King and any other traditional RPG you're going to see on the market out there. It can be challenging, it can be difficult, there's a lot to learn, and not really that much in the way of hand-holding from the developer. A lot of stuff that I learned from going on the wiki and doing some research on my own, or just figuring things out along the way. Once you get a handle on what you can expect from the random encounters and fights, and you're able to judge your ability to succeed in combats with relative accuracy, and you get better at managing things like weather conditions, terrain, and chaos, it gets a lot easier from there. But that's a pretty steep learning curve for a new player, so it'll take you a while to get to that point. I think for me it was probably like the 10-hour mark. Using in-game currency at the lore store also has a really significant impact on the ease at which the player is able to navigate the world map and find favorable encounters and items. Right around the midpoint of my third or fourth playthrough, after having gained a good understanding of how things work with about 10 or 15 lore store unlocks, including the herbalist character class, I felt the game was definitely at its peak for me. Team was strong, I was consistently finding some single-use items that were key, really allowed me to have some survivability in and outside of fights, and the equipment that I had was good enough that I felt that I could handle some of the mini-bosses that the game were throwing at me with relative ease. But it was still challenging in a good way, and I was having a lot of fun with it. And for me, this was the best part of For the King. That being said, things tended to trend a little bit downwards following that. Even though the game can feel pretty rewarding at times, especially when you pull off a really cool play and just completely outplay the relatively straightforward AI, but an AI that can be a little bit BS. There are some things that I think are just outright key design flaws, and these are things that negatively impact the player experience in the long term. So the first one is the implementation of status effects. And I want to say before I get into it, I'm not opposed to status effects as a whole. I think they're fantastic in other games. Just random example, Pokemon and status effects in Pokemon work, I feel like. And even though there are some things that can be a little bit frustrating about status effects in Pokemon, there's this level of counterplay. So even though it works in theory, in For the King, most enemies worth their salt have 4 to 6 built-in immunities that make any status effects completely useless on them. While I can completely understand not wanting status effects to be a crutch that people use to gain an advantage in a combat, things are not properly balanced in a way that players are able to use status effects, and instead they're basically useless, especially towards the end game. So this creates a situation in which players are forced to prioritize raw damage and stat bonuses over weapons, which are useful in only very specific circumstances. And that leads to some pretty stale gameplay, and it makes fights play out basically identically, almost every single time. Because if you're not able to use status effects, then ways that combat can play out are pretty much linear. You deal damage, the enemy does damage, and then you respond with either damage healing or some other damage dealing ability. The second point of contention with me was in the equipment destroying effects which some enemies have, especially in the later stages of the game. As it stands, there is no counterplay that I've come across other than simply not equipping your best items, which is unintuitive and frustrating. And it doesn't even work against abilities that destroy single-use items, because those are always on your hotbar down at the bottom, and you can't remove that. For those of you who have not played For the King which are watching this, there are certain abilities that certain enemies can use, like Acid and Inflame, which simply destroy items. That's what they do. And if the enemy lands a successful hit against one or sometimes multiple of your characters, it will apply those effects and destroy those items instantly. Not only that, but this compounds with the previous point on status effects. Because loot is so RNG dependent, the player may come across a very competent weapon with a high stat line, and one that has a lower base damage, but has a good status effect granting ability. Unfortunately, if the player chooses to use the highly statted weapon at any point during their run, they risk it being destroyed. And if they use the status effect granting ability, it may only be usable in, I would say probably about half, based on my experience, of most endgame encounters, which makes it so that you are forced basically then to run the risk of using your good weapon or just burning through your single-use items, which are so necessary to have in some of the harder fights in the game. I think that should these mechanics ever be readdressed, the game would benefit immensely, and replayability would be a lot less tiresome. It's a little bit frustrating as it stands. I'm still having fun with the game. I think that overall For the King was a good pickup for me. I got it for about $8 on sale. Like I said, I've already sunk about 30 hours into it, so I've more than met my quota of $1 per hour of playtime. And I think that I'm probably going to check out some of the other DLCs for it. That being said, if you are considering purchasing this game when it's not on sale, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it, but still very fun nevertheless. And if they do ever come back and fix some of these things that I would consider like pretty glaring issues, then I think that the game would be amazing. That is pretty much all that I have for you guys today. If you do have any questions, comments, feedback, disagree with me, you agree with me, please feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. I will catch you guys next time.